A performer's life is about a fresh page opened every day and cooking some concert as the audience demands.
Great honor to have you as my guest today. Welcome to Chat with Chithra. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you for inviting me.
You are a child prodigy and you're already an icon from a very young age. You know, I used to remember watching you on the television when I was in school as well. And, you had this Sunday broadcast of Spirit of Unity concerts.
Yeah,
And
91. Yeah.
yeah, it used to come around lunchtime.
Yeah.
So my father used to call all of us and see, look at this young boy, how brilliant he is. And you are a source of inspiration. Me as when I was growing up as well, you are a source of inspiration to many youngsters and many musicians. That is
Thank
something
you.
really very, very amazing. But at what point did you actually realize what you just started off from a very young age has actually become your passion?
By the time I even could think of, I was quite in the thick of the profession. I began performing when I was 6 years old. Performing was something like a thing of a great interest and a very playful activity for me somehow, because I always had a deep passion for music. I got into much more the bigger circuits by my 10th and 11th when I played in organizations like Music Academy Chennai, or I even played in London for Bharatiya Vidya Bhavan and other places. So as I grew, my training became all the more intense. There was a point when I came to high school when I knew that I wasn't succeeding in school because I was so much into music. That's when I think I realized more or less that music was anyways going to be my profession, and that I would spend so much of my vitals trying to pass an exam in school, which was getting extremely hard because I was traveling every other day for concerts, and it was quite a demanding profession even when I was before teens and into teens. Things naturally fell into place, though it was a very demanding profession.
Yeah, you had to really make a choice.
But I didn't really have a choice in a sense. I was too deep into music. I was fairly well known as an upcoming artist. A step backward to look into whether I need music was not a choice at that point in time. Because my father had staked a lot in terms of quitting his job and moving me over to Chennai and then pursuing music at an advanced level. And there was so much of jealous factors because, when you come into, this scene as 11, 12-year old, occupying the space of many senior artists. At that point, the only way forward was to work harder and to really prove that you were worth the opportunities that were given to you. So there was no really choice if you were to see it that way.
Right. Was there a certain amount of joy when you accompanied them or when they accompanied you?
See, I used to watch all these legends as phenomenal artists with my guru, Palgad K.V. Narayan Swami sir, or other of his contemporaries of those times. It was a great thing that they agreed to support me as a 10, 11-year-old, accompany me on the stage. But it came with its own huge challenges. As a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, I was not so aware of maybe how the sensitivities involved in with a senior musician. So it was a lot of challenge, more so for my parents who were managing my career, especially my dad. So it came with a lot of difficulty. At that point, you are playing with a senior artist who has put in 5, 6 decades in this profession. But you are the center of attraction because you are 11 or 12, 13-year-old. So it comes with its own anger, jealousy. As a child, my reaction may have not been the best in certain scenarios, but as a child, what else do you know? Obviously, you may be the center of attraction at the moment. That may not have gone down well with the senior artist. It was a pleasure and a pain at the same time. But I'm very grateful that those artists were quite magnanimous in supporting me as a child artist, setting aside their seniority. And
Yeah, giving you the right platform you deserve. You must have come across or overcome so many hurdles right from a young age.
it is the pressure of it rubs off on you at a much later stage. As a child, my father kept me insulated from all his problems in bringing me up in some ways. But obviously, it's not an easy thing. Here in Chennai is the capital of Carnatic music, so to say. So it's also a melting pot with most prolific performers coming in from different states. Though I was a Tamilian from Tirunelveli, but I grew up in Karnataka, so I was considered an outsider, so to say, from Bangalore. So it came with its own challenges of getting used to the language and people often viewing you as an outsider than a part of the Tamil fraternity. But that was the case with almost all the top-notch performers because they all came from outside of Chennai. Whether it be Dr. Balamurali Krishna or Mandarin Srinivas or Chiti Babu or Ravi Kiran, myself, and a host of them.
Right.
Yeah.
You started off with Carnatic music.
Yes.
You've had 2 or 3 gurus in Carnatic music. Later on, you had the opportunity to learn from Maestro, late Pandit Jasrajji as well.
Pandit Jasrajji, yeah. See, my main gurus were only my father, Palgad Kevinaran Swami sir, and then Pandit Jasrajji. In between, I began with R.K. Srikandan sir in Bangalore, but that was only for a very, very short duration, and he also didn't teach me personally. Some of his senior disciples started me off. But I have acquired my knowledge through so many sources. There used to be times when some of the very knowledgeable musicians who couldn't make it as performers have recorded certain compositions or have taught me some rhythm combinations, and that way I have acquired my knowledge through many sources.
Right. What has been their influence on you?
See, my time with Palgad Kevin and Swami sir, I still remember quite vividly that it used to be a very intense time when he used to teach me the very final aspect at a very advanced level. That was between my 7 and 11 years of age. So it was mentally very taxing. Every lesson used to last 3-4 hours. The beauty of what he taught me was not particularly his style of music, nor he was not a guru that that would say, "Oh, you have to only follow my style." He taught me music at a very fine level as to how to see music, how to approach music, which I realized the importance of that much later in my life because the foundation that he gave me, how to align yourself to the Shruti, or how to look into the Gamaka structures in Carnatic music, how to dissect them. So these were the things that he taught me, the values, the perfect values of how to process music, how to understand music. That was what was the strength upon which I could build up my knowledge. That was the most important stage of my life. But my father has been an overall guru who was also very knowledgeable. Though he was a biochemist by his profession, but he had learned a lot of music, so he knew the right kind of inputs to give me. So I had some rhythm training. He was the main person who even today relate to every day in whatever I bounce off my ideas. I always have a frank discussion on music with. But then Pandit Jasrajji came into my life much later, much later, nearly 20 years of being in this profession. Of course, he was a phenomenal performer, so he gave me a lot of insight into how Hindustani music functions, what are the do's and don'ts, insight into Hindustani ragas, the way the progressions with the ragas work. That was another fabulous time, of learning for me. And the one that helped, I would say, helped with me, in the Jugalbandi performances, because I have more than 1,000 Jugalbandi performances with almost all the senior artists of the north of India. So it gave me a great insight into the music. So gelling with anybody was more like speaking the same language.
And what was your rapport with your gurus?
It was a typical Guru Sishya strict relation. He was a very kind man, but obviously I was very playful at that time, so I had to be dealt with pretty strictly. So that bondage of a very affectionate Guru versus a student who was very affectionate of his Guru was not so much felt. At that moment, I saw him as a very strict Guru. With Pandit Jasrajji also was a very strict Guru, but then with him I had a different equation in a sense. I was a performer already. I had been invited by Pandit Jasrajji to perform in his festivals, but he was a strict guru. Of course, when it came down to teaching me, was a very strict business. But then he used to treat me very kindly, and we had other aspects of understanding between us. There used to be moments when I used to drive him around towns, and then I would fly with him, accompanying him in many of his trips. It was a great relation, I would say, where I would treat him as a guru, and he would also treat me as a student. Plus, he would also recognize the fact that I was a performer from Carnatic music. So whenever I used to perform with him, he would introduce to the audience and say, "He is not just my student, he is a flautist who's performed a lot around the world, and then I would ask him to play Carnatic music for a few minutes. So he was a very generous man of that kind.
Very interesting. Now, as a soloist, what is your relationship with your audience, and how do you connect with the audience?
It is, anybody would be lying to you if they say they're going to play for themselves. A performance involves taking into account the kind of audience that you're playing for. Performance also involves taking requests from the audience, interacting with the audience, tweaking your performance depending on how it is proceeding on a particular day. I would say I will give it my best, and I would employ my training and resources to the fullest when I perform. I also look into what the audience would like to listen to. It's a combination of playing for yourself and also taking into account what the audience.
You need to strike a balance between the two, and
Oh, it is certainly striking a balance. Even in a performer's life, there are many reasons why you are invited. Your teen years, you are invited because you are good and you are young. After a while, a certain maturity is required for you to handle a certain types of performance. And later, you are invited to a certain environment because you are very young with full of energy. You can turn around a concert and get the audience going. Because there are situations where we would come in between two very senior artists, like in their 70s, whose music would more be in a path of slow but very experienced kind of music, which may not have an entertainment value for the audience. So you are invited in between the two to bring in some energy and keep the energy going in the audience. Yeah, as performers, we go through a variety of acts, variety of stages when you are expected to act certain ways depending on your age factor and what are the instruments you are playing with. In fact, even choose to play a certain key in the instrument depending on which audience we are targeting that day. If I'm going to play for students, I'm not going to sit and play only bhajan. I'm going to be in a very combative mood to engage with the audience because I'm playing for students who are not there to be on a path of spiritualness or whatever. They want that energy level in the music. A performer's life is about a fresh page opened every day and cooking some concert as the audience demands. And that is why certain performers are successful and certain are not so successful.
so true. I had the opportunity to attend a few concerts. The feedback after the concert, some used to be very positive and overwhelming, and some others I didn't even understand anything. So there was an audience disconnect. So what you said is very true. I think it's important to establish that rapport between the kind of audience you're going to perform before,
It
right?
is absolutely, and every successful performer would have done his homework. If it is a series of concerts, we would also inquire on what the other artists played, what was the response to those ragas. Instrumental music is, though is appreciated by the masses, there is also a difficulty with not being able to connect with lyrical content of the music. So we depend mainly on melodies and the ragas that could work. Maybe the audience is very familiar with ragas like Kalyani, Hamsadvani, the famous ragas that have been either popularized due to some movies or some famous Carnatic musicians, or even in any time we are capable of playing more than 500 ragas at any given time. But the audience would only be aware of about 25, 30, 40 ragas, which they would so like to listen to at least one or two of them in a concert. If you play everything that is not so familiar with them, they would immediately consider the concert not so successful. There are many factors in a concert that one has to go by. There are also factors of how we choose our accompanying artists to suit the occasion. Every artist will not be suitable for a certain occasion, and we ourselves as main performers will not be suitable for all environments. Our styles will have some suitability with some occasions, and will not have some suitability with certain occasions. But in those times, we also have to think about how to tweak our art presentation, or we'll have to partner with other artists who could bring in that element to the concert.
A lot of planning beforehand needs to be done.
It's a thought process. Beyond a point, it becomes a normal day at work. When we get on stage, we will have a feel of the audience. We need not have done any homework for it.
Amazing. You've always been a classical musician. I'm sure you must have been easily approached by many composers from the film fraternity for music composing. Was that a very conscious decision to stay away from film music?
I'll tell you something. In Carnatic music, instrumentalists are not so much in demand with the film industry. In most film industry, it is the vocalists who are in great demand because every song involves lyrics. Instrumentalists are more or less session artists who play as a background score.
Right. Okay.
I have been part of 2, 3 movies, but not so many, where my expertise perhaps was required. But predominantly, the movie industry has musicians very specialized in that. Now, for instance, a flute player in the movie industry of India is expected to produce sounds of the birds to sounds of the sirens of an ambulance to everything that is out of the box. So there are musicians who are session artists who can produce all these effects according to the composer's demands and vision. That a classical flute player is often not, especially South Indian classical flute players can't do that job. The
Right.
North Indian flute players have been slightly more successful in playing film music, like Pandit Hariprasad Chaurasia or Ronu Majumdar or even Rakesh Chaurasia. All these have come into the music, movie industry first, and then branching out into classical music more later. Because Carnatic music per se has a very, very strong flavor to it, so which is not very suitable for the film industry, which needs more lighter tones, lighter ways of playing. For the fear of mixing up classical and light, we often don't venture so much into it.
I can understand. Education through music in the younger generation. What are your thoughts?
It is absolutely essential. Youngsters are exposed to, if not one, more than one instrument or form of music. It is 100% essential. I have had the good fortune of playing more than 1,000 school concerts in India alone,
Amazing.
wherein I've gone into the corners of the country to share music amongst the school children. They're absolutely elated when they see performers like us.
I'm
But
sure.
unfortunately, the pressures of academics being so in India, music has not found its rightful place in school. The way it has found in Europe, where I also go and play a lot of school concerts all over Europe. There it is part of the grading system. Everybody has to learn a musical instrument. That kind of develops interest in children, and later on as adults they would support the music of their country, the art forms more passionately. Unfortunately, in India that is not taken off fully.
Right.
And it is also it believed that anybody who has pursued music have been better human beings of some kind. Some form of art, I would say. I think as students, drama, painting, some form of art, or if possible, everything would be an asset that would help them.
Yeah, it will enable them to learn and appreciate things around them.
Oh, yes, certainly. Music, I would at times think those who do not understand music have lost so much in their life. In India, it is a very much, parents, if you take up music quite passionately, they're so afraid that you would not pursue academics
Yeah.
and that they would not be able to get their children married or get them placed or settled. But today, that thing is kind of opening up. Parents are becoming more bolder in letting their children explore their heart. And
So true. As you rightly said, things have started opening up. People are trying to see the opportunities and the benefits of learning music right from a young age.
music is still treated as a secondary profession, unfortunately. Because I collaborate a lot with the Western set of musicians. It's very common for a Western musician to have had some sort of a degree in music. So a lot of professional musicians also have a day job as a musician somewhere in some setup. But during this pandemic, it is all the more proved certain sections of the society have been more useful than certain section of society like musicians. They've come as a useful tool for a lot of people to bring some solace at this
Yeah.
moment difficulty. Whoever took music as a profession have really found it very hard to survive during this time. So if I were a parent, for instance, who thought music is not a viable profession, these pandemic times would have proved my point very right. Especially in India, it's a subject that has not much support.
Right.
Neither the government are able to support because there are so many people below the poverty line otherwise. So music comes as one of the last priorities of support. So during these times, I would think parents would be more than happy that their children did not take up music as a profession.
That's really sad because, as you
It
said,
is.
the pandemic has really affected the entertainment sector because of the live concerts, performances. But does not rule out the most important factor that what music can actually do to you.
See, the main issue here is majority of the audience got used to free performances free content on YouTube, social media. So now suddenly during a pandemic, when people were asked to pay money and listen to music,
Yeah.
they were not so interested in supporting that, which is rather unfortunate. Otherwise, music could have been an equally viable profession just as any other profession.
Yeah, it has changed the format, of course, which may not be that satisfying both as an artist and also from the audience perspective. And not only that, there are too many musicians who have taken up to the online portal these days, especially during the pandemic. Perhaps that could be one of the reasons why people are a bit hesitant to pay and listen to the performances. What are your thoughts?
So there are two kinds of musicians. Musicians who would use the social media platform to popularize their art, their talent, and then expect live performances and well-paid performances to come their way. That is a normal way of how we function as professional musicians. But there's a whole segment of musicians who can never be live performers, but they are good content creators for social media platforms wherein the audience attention span is very short. A certain music track that a novice of a musician would have created would become viral on social media with millions of hits, giving an audience an impression that this is a legend when he is a novice. And now there is a mix-up. Those people will come onto the live platform and find themselves totally in a space where they cannot handle it. So you have both ends to the issue. As a live performer, I would say that no day an online concert could equal the experience of a live performance. And during these difficult moments, the audience have a responsibility in them to support good artists who are producing, online content because they are not able to get on stage and present live concerts and not expect it for free.
We need to
Because for some
respect.
other artists who don't care, because they cannot ever get on the live stage, they would just belt out as much possible free content onto the social media. That shouldn't be compared even to professional artists who have done years of sadhana.
Yeah.
There should be some diligence on part of the audience to support genuinely good artists who are working day and night to preserve this art form. At the end of the day, the governments also should support. After all, Indian classical music or its food or the various art forms are the recognition that the country gets. If I go and say India, they are more reminded of the Indian classical music or the Taj Mahal or the Dal or
Good.
the monuments.
Yes.
Nobody talks about doctors or lawyers or computer engineers, though they're all equally great professions. Art always has a special place in the minds of people and identity of a country.
Yes.
It's just, I don't know why, but musicians are not considered a part of this community. They say, oh, there are so many poor people to help. So what does it mean that musicians are not poor enough to be helped? I'm not talking about musicians at large. Carnatic music or Hindustani music has very rich musicians, not so rich musicians, and dirt pure musicians like in any other profession. For instance, in Carnatic music, you have a lot of Nadaswaram artists, Tamil artists, folk artists, whose very existence is driven around where they live.
Yes.
Like they perform in weddings, temple celebrations,
Yeah.
or processions of various kinds. Their whole work happens around the place where they live.
There's clearly a disconnect. As a musician, I've always been very intrigued. Could these collaborations have an impact on your work with your standard classical repertoire?
At times, yes. It be at multiple levels. It could be purely reproduction of an instrumental technique that you heard with your fellow flute player from the West,
Right.
or a winds player, or a certain movement that would have troubled you. When in collaborations, it's all about adjustments. It's all about what you bring onto the table and what they bring onto the table. During the course of that, there would be certain difficulties that have to be overcome because of the different genres of music that we represent. This understanding and impact of each other's work is felt on many levels. How they plan a concert, how they visualize music, how they visualize silence between notes, and how they approach composing itself on the whole, what they expect in a composition. And they also look at our music in a similar way. These collaborations bring about a lot for each other to understand, and there is a lot that we learn, and we also try to incorporate in our own own concerts also.
Right.
It has a profound influence on each other's works. Whenever you see a Western, say for instance, I was on the Grammy nominated album with the great John McLaughlin. So while recording with him, one would see the amount of fine tuning that he would do, amount of how on top of things he would be, and how they visualize work. So it would give you a great insight. Carnatic musicians never looked at art that way.
Wow.
For instance, one striking thing that I have observed in the musicians of the West is none of them are very devout religious people. Whereas in India, musicians are quite devout and very religious. There are certain sections of musicians who would associate even the beginning of a concert time to, or the planes they would take to their next cities to a good Rahu Kalam, or they would look into astrological calendars before they set out on a journey. But whereas in the West, I've seen people who would live by the rule of law. They would not go to churches. They do agree that there is God, but they would not believe it is in a form of a temple or an idol to worship. So you learn from a variety of things like this. Seniority doesn't matter. Your expertise does not matter. You show up as a professional musician at a 9 o'clock for a rehearsal, you have to. And nobody is higher than the other. Everybody is the same in the room. Everybody has a role to play to bring together a concert to fruition. But this is not the way often we visualize in our field. There's a huge place for the aura of the musician, his
Yeah.
seniority, his name. One often would not argue with him as senior artist. You talk about music, incorporating music, but I'm talking about situations where musicians have so much outside of music also to learn from each other. How they pursue their art, how they practice their art, so much to learn. So collaborations are the only way that a musician has progressed. The great Pandit Ravi Shankar was an epitome of that essence of what collaborations really meant. Even when he collaborated with his own, Guru Bandhu, in Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, the very Jugalbandi was so much of a give and take. He was a perfect example of how collaborations should be. And take Ustad Zakir Hussain, take numerous musicians in the history of Indian music. They've all progressed, and they are all the names they are because of not just their own music that they play, but they're also the enormous work they've done in terms of collaboration.
That's very insightful. What is very special about your style and your flute playing techniques? What is it that has made you different from the others?
Often I think coming from a lineage does more harm to you than help to you. I didn't have a lineage to boast of. My grandfather was a farmer. All our families were into Vedas, and it's typical Iyer community of South India. My father was a professor of biochemistry and an amateur flautist. Perhaps that was my strength. I didn't come from a background of flute playing. I had no gurus who taught me formally how to play the flute, thereby influencing my way of playing flute. So I think that was the biggest contribution that I could have had as a not coming from a lineage. Because whenever you come from a famous lineage, you're often compared to your ancestors who were part of the lineage, the styles they represented, and then it would also mean perhaps that you were constricted because of that. So I had gurus, vocal gurus, thereby I was on my own in the ways I wanted to translate music onto my instrument. So I had to find my own ways. So therefore there was a whole 20 years of my time that I spent practicing this instrument at a very high level, advanced level, performing. So all those collaborations, everything kind of added to the way I played the flute. Thankfully, I sounded so different from my contemporaries. I was able to establish myself as a very different artist from the others. Had I followed the same beaten path of a legend, I would say beaten path because every legend creates such an impact with his work. Anybody pursuing his work would often fall into the trap of being compared to him, the creator of that style. So maybe my students would have that disadvantage tomorrow because they will be often compared to my work. This is a very difficult thing in any student's life. So as a student, if you are lucky enough to get multiple, various inputs in your life, that musical inputs, that, in your student days, that you get an idea to think so differently from your guru. You're really fortunate. And gurus also should encourage that, because if the guru wants to just replicate himself in a student, it is the greatest disservice that he could do to his student. Because when the guru is such a legend and his works have been so well heard and well published, the audience cannot think beyond the guru when it relates to their works. Guru should always teach the student how to see music in a much broader sense, so that the student can utilize that talent to take his art further. My flute playing was a product of that thing where I had to develop my own style and I had to fend for myself as far as translating stuff onto my instrument was concerned. So thereby I was very fortunate to create a style for myself.
Yeah, that's right. If you have a great lineage, perhaps your bars are immediately raised. So I think it's a challenge.
We also place on record that these techniques that I've made were not with the intention of creating them. I never had these intentions. It was all a thing that I observed and absorbed as I progressed in my career. But today, you see, I'm very happy that a lot of flute players, I get calls so often saying, hey, you are playing in the radio. But when I actually check out the recording, it is not me who is playing in the radio or the recording. I'm very fortunate that way that a lot of youngsters have imbibe my style of playing. But the thing with music is that you don't get credit for that somehow. Every musician just comes in, does whatever work for himself and leaves,
You are a child prodigy and you have created your own.
Yeah, but it's not like a patented subject which is, copyrighted. We
Yeah,
are also products of what we heard,
yeah,
and the next generation will also be products of what they heard of us.
sure.
It will be good if each one credits each other for where they got this inspiration. I
Mm,
think this is more prevalent in West where musicians openly
correct.
thank whoever created that work, and they say, I've been inspired by this, I've been inspired by that. They have nothing to lose.
Yeah, who are your role models?
No, I would lie to you if I have a role model. So, no, I don't have any. But I have great admiration for a lot of wonderful musicians whose music I've heard, whether it be Pandit Ravi Shankar or Vilayat Khan, my gurus, the great exterior musicians like Shamanaguri Srinivas Iyer, G.N. Balasubramanyam. But I've always told myself that I shouldn't copy anyone, that I have been totally against that. But I have emulated a lot of musicians and their ways and their perfections, levels of perfections or the sincerity to art. Why just music? I mean, a lot of, others from other professions have also taught me a lot. But
Right.
I don't think I would like to call any one particular name as a role model.
Sure. What is it that you want to achieve through your music?
It's a kind of high that I get when I play music. That is a high that I would always look forward to achieving within myself. It could be in creation of an instrument. It could be so many different kinds. Today I may be elated because I found a new technique that I could use in a concert or teach my students. The highs vary from time to time. At the time when I came into the field, my biggest goal was to play in some of the nations that were farthest from India, or to the different concert halls that people would often rave about. But having done that all now, the goals, they're constantly changing. So in the last few years, I've worked a lot on implementing the longer bass flutes as primary instruments in my concert, because those were the instruments that were predominantly used in North Indian system of music. Often people would come to tell me, oh, I loved Carnatic flute, but it is a bit sharp on the ears. Or they would say they loved my bass flute segments more than they loved the short. There were a lot of technical issues of how it could be integrated into Carnatic music as a main instrument. So now I can successfully say I've done it. So like that, I have had so many major milestones to achieve. Music has provided a lot of those for me. If I hear back my recording that I made in the mid 90s as a teenager, I would still find it so interesting, and I would really tell myself that I cannot play like that today. So it's a journey, you cannot say that your childhood was more better than the adulthood, or adulthood have been better than
Yeah. Sure.
every stage has its own pluses and minuses. Any musician's life, whether it be his profession as to where he performs and how he performs, or his own music, should be a reflection of the times that we live in, and also should be something of a kind of a journey that has been different from the year before or a decade before.
Amazing. Yeah.
It has come naturally to me. I think my goal, if I were to have one, would be to popularize Carnatic instrumental music, which has always received a secondary treatment by the Carnatic music audience also. I mean, I'm not blaming anyone for it, because it's a lyrically rich system
Right.
of music. The vocalists have always been a very dominant factor in Carnatic music, which is fine. I'm also a great lover of vocal music, and I've also all through my life learned vocal music. But I also also feel that Carnatic music's instrumentalists should get more recognition and attention than what they have received so far. Hindustani music is much more popular than Carnatic music. So I would like to see it on par because both are equally great systems of music. Today it is getting more popular as the days are going by. So a lot of Carnatic musicians have contributed immensely to that.
Yes,
It has a
I
long way to go.
completely agree with you. Motto in life?
Be the best in what I do.
What are your strengths?
My fluidity of how I think life is. I'm not rigid in life.
How would you describe yourself?
A person who aims at perfection, though I can never be perfect, but I would like to see details in everything that I do. I'm a person who has very strong likes and dislikes for sure. And I'm also a person who is not so much into, I don't like to have controversies.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I'm a big aviation buff, so if I had not been a musician, I would have certainly been in aviation.
Right. What do you do to relax?
Well, I think travel, looking around the world.
If you could go back in time, what would you do differently?
I may have started my profession a bit late, enjoyed my school days or college days a bit.